They arrested a quiet old man in a worn-out truck, laughed at his war stories, and threw him in a cell. 30 minutes later, the FBI walked in, and no one was laughing anymore. "License and registration," Officer Jack Foster said flatly, resting one hand on his belt, the other on the frame of the old Chevy pickup's driver's side window. The driver, an older black man with deep lines in his face and tired eyes, moved slowly. "Yes, sir," he replied, voice gravelly, calm. His name was Thomas Carter, and everything about him said, worn but steady. The military fatigue jacket with faded patches, the rough beard, the way he didn't flinch under pressure. From the passenger seat, Officer Lucas Harris kept a hand near his holster, shifting his weight like he expected trouble. "You know why we pulled you over?" he asked. "Busted taillight," Thomas said, already pulling out his papers. "Been meaning to fix it. I got the part. Just haven't had time." Foster took the documents and looked them over. Clean, no prior. But something about the man irritated him. The calmness, maybe, or the way he looked straight ahead without a hint of fear. "You military?" Harris asked, eyeing the jacket. Thomas gave a slow nod. "Retired? Served long time ago." "What branch?" Foster pressed. "Army Special Recon, Southeast Asia mostly." Foster raised an eyebrow. "Special Recon, huh?" Thomas glanced up just for a second. It wasn't meant to sound like anything. Foster handed the documents to Harris and gestured toward the truck. "Pop the glove box, sir." Thomas paused. "Mind telling me what you're looking for?" "Routine check," Foster said. Thomas sighed. "There's a pistol in there, military issued. It's registered." Foster's tone hardened. "You didn't mention that when we asked." "You didn't ask." The next minute escalated quickly. Foster pulled open the door. Out of the truck now. Thomas stepped out slowly, hands visible. No sudden movements. "It's legal. I've had that sidearm since 1973. It's not loaded." But neither officer cared. Harris reached in and pulled out the weapon. "You have a permit for this?" "Yes. Back pocket." They yanked it out, read it over. Still, Foster motioned for cuffs. "This doesn't feel right," Thomas said quietly. "You're not the one making calls today," Foster snapped. "Hands behind your back." Thomas obeyed. The cuffs clicked. Not tight, but deliberate. Harris stood watching him, maybe half curious, maybe just enjoying it. Foster gave a glance at the truck bed, muttered something under his breath. "You know," Thomas said as they walked him toward the cruiser. "I worked a mission in 1985 that never made the news, saved over a dozen civilians in Thailand, never even got a letter." Foster chuckled. "Yeah, and I dated a supermodel once." "I don't lie," Thomas said, not angry, just flat. "That's one thing I kept from the service." They drove him toward the Ridgepoint County Sheriff's Office. Thomas didn't say much after that, just watched the road roll by like he'd seen it all before, and maybe he had. Back at the station, Harris joked with dispatch about old G.I. Joe in his grandpa truck. Foster typed up the incident report. "Says he was in some recon unit. Probably just watched a few war movies and decided to live it out." They put Thomas in the temporary holding cell, lights buzzing overhead. He sat quietly, staring at the floor. No anger, no fear, just waiting. But right before Foster could finish the booking paperwork, a soft alert sounded from the terminal. Red, not the usual flag for a suspended license or a local warrant. It was a priority ping from Federals, then another. Then a phone rang. But before Foster could pick up, headlights swept across the front glass of the station. 3 unmarked SUVs rolled in without a word. Officer Harris leaned back in his chair, sipping from a half-empty coffee cup, watching Thomas through the narrow glass window of the holding cell. "He hasn't moved an inch," he muttered. "Creepy man, like he's just waiting for something." Foster didn't look up from his computer. Old guy bluffing, probably some burnout from the 80s trying to sound important. "I don't know," Harris said, tapping his fingers. "Something about him's off, that quiet kind of off." Foster scoffed. "He's just a dusty old man with a fake war story and a pistol he probably shouldn't have. We're the ones doing our jobs." Inside the holding cell, Thomas sat still on the bench, hands resting on his knees. He looked calm, too calm. Every so often, he'd glance at the wall clock, then back at the floor like counting down something. Deputy Sarah Whitmore came in from the front desk. "You two still haven't run full ID on that guy?" Foster waved her off. We're getting to it. She frowned. You should have done that before throwing him in a cell. Harris shrugged. He said he was special recon, whatever that means. Claimed he's got clearance and a registered firearm. If he's telling the truth, we'll find out. They didn't know that the moment Thomas's name hit their system, it triggered something else. Somewhere between a military archive and a federal security database, a red alert had been sent. Whitmore returned to her desk, but kept an ear on the conversation. Think he's one of those tinfoil veterans? Harris asked, smirking. Like the ones that say they train dolphins to sniff out submarines. You'd be surprised what the military used to do, Whitmore mumbled. Foster hit send on the incident report. Yeah, and I'm supposed to believe this guy spent 30 years in some secret unit and then decided to drive around Alabama in a rusted-out Chevy. Right? Harris chuckled. Bet he sleeps with a knife under his pillow. Inside the cell, Thomas finally spoke, his voice soft but firm. You boys ever been in a firefight? They looked up. Foster approached the glass. What did you say? I asked if you've ever had to step between a mother and a sniper's scope before deciding who gets to breathe another minute. Foster laughed. Here we go again. But Thomas wasn't joking. I still remember her eyes. She didn't speak English. But I knew what she was saying, and I took the shot. Not proud of it, but I did it. Silence fell across the room. Even Harris stopped smiling. You can either believe me or not, Thomas added. But if you think I'm just an old fool with a story, you're not paying attention. Foster stared at him a moment longer, then turned away. He's messing with us. Don't fall for it. But the room felt different now, a little heavier. Then the phone rang. Line 3, a direct line, rarely used. Foster picked up. Ridgepoint Sheriff's Office. A voice on the other end didn't waste time. You have Thomas Carter in custody? Yeah. Who's asking? This is Agent Marcus Reed with the Bureau. Do not release him. Do not move him. Keep him secure and do not, under any circumstances, speak to him again. Foster blinked. Wait, what? The call ended. Whitmore stood slowly from her desk. Did he just say? Before she could finish, headlights hit the station again. Low, powerful beams. 3 unmarked SUVs came to a smooth stop outside. Men in suits stepped out fast. No hesitation, no wasted movement. The front doors opened, and in walked 4 federal agents flanked by 2 uniformed officers from the Bureau's Rapid Response Division. No words, just presence. The air changed. Foster stood frozen. Harris swallowed hard. Whitmore took a step back. The agent in front flashed his badge. Where's Thomas Carter? Foster stammered. Agent Marcus Reed didn't blink. We'll take it from here. But as Reed passed, he added without looking, we need access to all footage, paperwork, and anything said or done since the arrest. Immediately, Agent Reed walked straight through the station, eyes locked on the holding cell like he already knew the layout, the lighting, the smell of the place. His coat barely shifted as he moved, his badge still clutched loosely in his hand. Behind him, Agents David Nash and Ethan Cole broke off toward the desks. No hesitation. They plugged into the nearest workstations, already pulling up case files and video logs. Foster stepped forward. Hey, hang on. What's going on here? You can't just walk in. And Reed cut him off without turning. You're sitting on a protected asset. That man is not to be questioned, touched, or processed unless cleared by federal command. If you have a problem, feel free to call the Pentagon. Foster froze mid-step. Inside the holding cell, Thomas looked up. The flicker of a smile touched the corner of his mouth. Not smug, not triumphant, just calm. Reed tapped a code on the keypad, opened the cell himself. Sergeant Carter. Thomas stood. Took you long enough. Reed nodded. Traffic in Crestwood was a mess. Thomas stepped out slowly. His joints cracked, his knees stiff, but he moved with the kind of quiet control that didn't match his age. They treat you like a suspect? Reed asked. I've had worse, Thomas said, glancing at Harris. Then Foster. At least they didn't ask me what unit I served in 3 times in a row like the last ones did. Harris spoke up, nervous now. Look, we didn't know who he was, the pistolate wasn't declared, and we had to follow. You didn't know because you didn't bother to listen. Agent Ethan Cole said coldly, still typing. And now you're flagged in our system as having mishandled a Class A sensitive individual. Congratulations. The room was dead quiet. Reed turned to Whitmore. Ma'am, involved in the arrest? No, sir, she said quickly. I was at the front desk. You're clear. The rest of you step back. Every word, every move since that stop is being logged. If body cam footage shows mistreatment, you'll be hearing from our legal branch." Cole printed something from the workstation and handed it to Harris. "Here's what you missed. Thomas Carter, former Master Sergeant, 4th Recon Unit, black classified for most of the 80s and 90s, stationed in Thailand, El Salvador, Beirut, and Sierra Leone. Medal of Valor, Pentagon citation for preservation of civilian life." Foster blinked, confused. "A guy like that be flagged?" Reed turned slowly toward him. "Because Sergeant Carter isn't just a veteran. He's part of a long-standing federal protection program for operatives whose actions still hold legal weight in international law. The gun you arrested him over? It's tied to a mission that kept an entire embassy from burning to the ground in 1989. You know how many people would love to get their hands on him?" "Wait," Harris said, voice dropping. "You mean someone might be tracking him?" "Not might," Cole said. "Is." Foster stepped back like he'd touched something hot. "We had no idea." "No," Reed replied. "You didn't, and that's the problem." In the background, one of the agents downloaded the dashcam and bodycam files onto a secure drive. Every second of the stop, every smirk, every insult. Thomas stood watching quietly. He wasn't angry. He looked tired, like a man who'd carried too many secrets for too long and didn't expect thanks anymore. "Do you want to press charges?" Reed asked him. Thomas shook his head. "Not worth it, but I'd like my sidearm back." Agent David Nash handed it over in a sealed case, still warm from the scanner. "You're cleared." Thomas took it and turned to Foster. "You ever stop someone because they look like they might be a problem, even when your gut said otherwise?" Foster didn't answer. "Maybe next time," Thomas said quietly. "You ask before you assume." But before he could leave, Whitmore approached with something in her hand. Thomas's military dog tags, which had slipped under the desk. Thomas held the tags in his palm, fingers brushing the worn edges. The metal was faded, the numbers barely legible anymore, but they still meant something. They were a piece of him no arrest could take. Whitmore looked at him closely. "You really were part of 4th Recon." He nodded once. "They called us ghosts. We went where others wouldn't, got out when we could." Foster stood to the side, arms crossed, trying not to show the weight hitting him all at once. Harris just looked at the floor. Every wisecrack he'd made echoed back in his ears like a mistake he wished he hadn't voiced. Reed motioned for the other agents to give them a minute. The station cleared out slightly, leaving a rare silence. Thomas turned toward the desk and pulled a thin envelope from the inside of his jacket. It had yellowed edges, a military seal barely visible under tape. "This is my final mission record," he said. "Declassified last year. They mailed it to me like it was a library receipt." He placed it on the desk. "Thailand, 1985. We were on a recon extraction near the border. Intelligence had us targeting a rebel group holding hostages in a converted schoolhouse. 4 Americans, 2 aid workers, a photojournalist, and a 6-year-old boy." Foster frowned. "I never heard anything about that." "You weren't supposed to," Thomas replied. "We got them out. The price was 4 of my team, best men I ever knew." He went quiet for a moment. The room felt like it shrunk. "I've lived a long time," he said. "But every time I hear someone laugh like they know what war feels like, what it smells like, it makes me wish they could carry just one day of it in their pocket. Just one." Reed leaned on the back wall, arms crossed. "Most of the missions Thomas ran didn't exist on paper. That's why we monitor his name. He's not a threat. He's a record of things this country doesn't want to remember." Whitmore spoke softly. "But why was he flagged so fast?" Cole re-entered, holding a folder. 3 weeks ago, Carter's name showed up on a leaked list from an old CIA archive. Someone's been tracing the names. Some of those people are already missing." Thomas gave a half laugh. "So, you see why I don't exactly appreciate being dragged out of my truck like I'm trying to rob a gas station." Harris rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, man, I didn't know." "No, you didn't," Thomas said, looking him straight in the eye. "But you should have treated me like a man, not like a problem." The tension wasn't just between them now. It spread across the walls, into the silence, into every half-smirk and careless assumption they'd thrown his way. Reed stepped forward. "We've been trying to pull guys like Thomas out of the public eye before the wrong people catch up. But every time one of them gets flagged, it's a risk. Tonight, you added to that." Foster looked at Thomas again. This time different. Not as a suspect, not even as a veteran, but as someone he had underestimated badly. "I'll write a statement," Foster said. "Full incident detail." Thomas raised a brow. "Write it for yourself, not for me." Reed checked his watch. "We need to move. Every minute he's on file here, he's a step closer to showing up in places he shouldn't." Thomas slipped the dog tags back around his neck. They made no sound, like they'd learned silence too. Whitmore hesitated before asking, "You still keep in touch with any of your team?" Thomas shook his head slowly. "Out of the 11, I'm the last one breathing." But as they turned to leave, Reed stopped at the door and said, "There's something else." Thomas was on standby for an operation that never launched. The Pentagon never confirmed why, but it's why we never lost track of him. Reed's words hung in the air like static. No one in the room moved. Not Whitmore, not Harris, and certainly not Foster. It was as if they'd been pulled into something far bigger than themselves, and they knew it. "What kind of operation?" Whitmore asked quietly. Reed glanced at Thomas. "Let's just say it was supposed to happen on American soil, and if it had, you'd all be speaking about the man with a lot more care." Thomas didn't flinch. "I was tasked with coordination, not execution, but that file stayed locked up for almost 30 years. They didn't bury it because it was irrelevant. They buried it because it came too close to something they weren't ready to admit." Foster felt his mouth go dry. "We were just doing our job." Reed shot him a cold look. "You weren't doing a job, you were making a judgment. There's a difference." Agent Cole reappeared with a flash drive. "We've got all footage, dash cam, body cam, station cams. It's already uploading to internal review." Harris rubbed his face. Where we going to get investigated?" "That depends," Cole said plainly, "on how honest your report is and how well you remember every word you said since the moment you pulled him over." Foster tried to regain composure. "We didn't touch him. No excessive force." "Excessive force isn't the only metric," Reed replied. "There's tone, there's intent, and then there's ignorance. Some mistakes cost lives, others cost careers." Thomas stepped in now, voice calm but pointed. "You think I care about lawsuits? I've had snipers in tree lines. You think this room shakes me?" Harris looked up, shame now replacing his earlier swagger. "I care about something else," Thomas said. "Respect, not the kind you ask, for the kind you give without needing to be told." Foster glanced at the sealed case on the table. "Thomas's pistol. Why do you even still carry that thing?" Thomas took a long breath. "Because there are people who still look for the ones who stopped them. I'm not famous, but I'm remembered, sometimes not by the right people." Whitmore leaned forward. "And if we hadn't pulled you over, you might have helped more than you hurt," Thomas said. "But the way it went down, it could have ended a lot worse for all of us." Reed checked his phone. "We've got to move. Safe transport is inbound. He's going to a federal location for reprocessing and asset debrief." Thomas turned toward the door, but not before he looked back at Foster and Harris. "I'm not here to make you feel small," he said. "I just hope next time you take 2 seconds longer before deciding what kind of man's in front of you." Neither officer said anything. There wasn't much they could say. As Thomas walked past them, Cole handed Reed a folder. "We flagged Harris and Foster for internal review. Command will decide whether to forward it to their State Department." Foster's voice cracked. "Wait, you're submitting us for discipline?" Cole looked him over. "You arrested a federally protected intelligence veteran, mocked his service, ignored protocol, and mishandled a firearm tied to classified history. What exactly did you think would happen?" Harris sat down, shoulders dropped. The kind of posture that only comes when reality sets in. Thomas, halfway to the door, paused. "I spent my whole life being invisible when it mattered, and impossible to ignore when it didn't. Maybe that's what this country turns you into, if you stick around long enough." Reed nodded toward the exit. "Let's get him out of here." But before they reached the hallway, a local news van pulled into the parking lot. Someone had tipped them off, and what came next would be harder to control. The whir of a camera lens zooming in through the front window was enough to draw every pair of eyes to the entrance. Metro 5 News had arrived. One cameraman, one field reporter, both moving quickly toward the building. Someone had made a call, probably thinking it would earn them points or stir up headlines. Reed muttered, "Damn it," and stepped forward to intercept. Thomas didn't break stride. He walked slower now, but with the kind of quiet dignity that didn't need a crowd. His boots hit the tile with a rhythm, like he was back on patrol. Every step measured. every glance purposeful. Outside, the reporter was already mic'd up. "Sir, is it true you were wrongfully arrested here tonight?" Reed turned, voice calm but firm. "This is a federal matter. No comment." Thomas stopped at the doorway, hand resting lightly on the push bar. He turned his head just enough to speak without looking at the cameras. "They thought I was someone I'm not," he said, "because I didn't dress like they did, because I was quiet, because I was black. But I am exactly who I say I am, and I've been carrying this country on my back for a lot longer than people care to remember." The reporter tried to fire off another question, but Reed guided Thomas gently outside, shielding him with his frame as the camera lights flashed. The SUVs were waiting. No sirens, no fuss, just tinted glass and silence. As Thomas climbed into the vehicle, he caught Whitmore's eye through the station window. She didn't wave, she didn't smile, but the way she stood there, watching, still said she understood something now that she hadn't before. Inside the station, Harris slumped over his desk, tapping a pen against his knee. He didn't say a word. Foster stared at the footage playback, the body cam he hadn't thought twice about turning on. The way he barked orders, the smirk he'd worn when Thomas mentioned his military history, the pistol being bagged like it belonged to a criminal. It was all there. Every moment of disrespect, casual and thoughtless. Whitmore turned away from the screen. "You're going to have to answer for it." Foster nodded slowly. "I know." Outside, the SUV doors shut. Reed didn't say much during the ride. Thomas leaned back, resting his head against the seat. His eyes didn't close, but his body loosened slightly. "Not relaxed?" Reed asked. "Never relaxed. But still, you good?" Thomas didn't answer right away. "Then they treated me like I didn't exist. You're not the first. You won't be the last." "Yeah," Thomas said, his voice low. "But I'm tired of being the warning lesson. They learn, and we still carry the bruises." The SUV turned onto a side road leading to a secure location, away from the station, away from the spotlight. Before they reached the gate, Thomas spoke again. "You know what I think about most?" "What's that?" "That kid in Thailand. The 6-year-old, the one I carried out in a rice sack to keep him from being seen." Reed turned slightly. "You saved him?" "Maybe," Thomas replied. "Or maybe I just delayed what the world already had in store for him." The vehicle pulled to a stop. Reed opened the door, but didn't rush Thomas. He let the old man take his time. Thomas stepped out, boots hitting gravel. He looked up at the stars for a second, then down at the dirt. "You want to know the truth?" he said. "Always. I didn't care about the arrest. I've been held at gunpoint by worse. What I care about is how fast they believe the worst about me without asking a single question." Reed nodded. "It won't be the last time someone like them does something like that." "I know," Thomas said, "but it should have been." He turned toward the building, walking slowly, back straight. Back inside the Ridgepoint County Sheriff's Office, Deputy Sarah Whitmore was already on the phone with Internal Affairs. She wasn't going to let what happened become just another buried file. 2 weeks later, the Ridgepoint County Sheriff's Office looked the same from the outside. Brick walls, faded signage, 2 patrol cruisers parked crooked as always. But inside, the atmosphere had shifted. Whitmore sat at her desk, flipping through a printed statement. The Internal Affairs team had come and gone, but the ripple left behind hadn't settled. Everyone walked a little lighter now, a little quieter. The jokes weren't as loud, the smugness wasn't as thick. Foster hadn't said much since that night. He was under review. His badge hadn't been pulled yet, but it was hanging by a thread. Harris was reassigned to desk duty, pending sensitivity training and a full procedural audit. Neither fought it. Thomas Carter's name was no longer just a file in a drawer. It was a reminder passed between officers behind closed doors and whispered about in the break room. The vet who'd been more than he seemed, the man they thought they could process and forget. Outside the station, a young man in a gray hoodie stepped off a city bus and approached the front desk. He was clean-cut, early 20s, holding a letter in his hand. "I'm looking for Deputy Whitmore," he said politely. She stepped out from her office. "That's me." He held up the letter. "I was told to give you this." She unfolded it carefully. The paper was lined, the handwriting sharp and precise, old-fashioned. It read, "Deputy Whitmore, you didn't have to step in. But you did. That says more about you than the badge you wear. I don't need justice. I've already had my share of fights, but I do believe in accountability. And you're the reason I still believe that's possible. Thank you." Thomas Carter. She read it twice. The signature was penned with a fine black ink, steady and clean. She folded the paper slowly, her chest height with something she couldn't quite name. "Did he ask you to bring this?" she asked the young man. He nodded. "He's staying outside Crestwood for a while. Off-grid. Doesn't want attention." Whitmore offered a small smile. "Tell him he's not forgotten." The young man nodded and left the stage just as quietly as he'd arrived. Back inside, Foster sat alone in the locker room, staring at his reflection. No uniform today, just a plain shirt and the feeling of something unfinished. He reached into his locker and pulled out a notepad. On it, he scribbled. "Saw a man. Didn't ask who he was. Treated him like a file, not a person." Then he closed it and slid it back into the drawer. Maybe no one else would ever read it, but he would. At a Veterans Resource Center 30 miles outside the city, Thomas sat in a folding chair across from a younger vet named Julian. Combat boots untied, cap pulled low. Julian spoke in quick bursts. "Too many memories, not enough space to hold them. I wake up thinking someone's going to kick the door in," Julian said. "Even though I'm back home, even though it's been 3 years, I can't turn it off." Thomas leaned forward. "You don't turn it off, you just learn where to place it. It doesn't go away. It just stops running the whole show." Julian stared at him. "How long did it take you?" Thomas gave a faint smile. Still counting, they sat in silence, both men carrying more than they'd ever say out loud. And yet in that silence, there was a kind of peace. Not perfect, not whole, but real. Back in Ridgepoint, Whitmore pinned Thomas's letter on the inside of her locker door. No spotlight, no ceremony. Just a reminder that sometimes the people we dismiss carry the heaviest stories. And sometimes one bad decision becomes a mirror we can't look away from.